Hi, everyone, and welcome to SMC's webinar, Breaking the Deal, Why the LISTO Needs to be Fixed. I'm Georgie Brumby, SMC's Deputy CEO and EGM of Advocacy, and today I also have the honour of being Acting CEO while our CEO is on some very well-deserved leave. To start proceedings, I'd like to acknowledge the traditional owners of the land from which we are all joining this webinar today. For me, that's here in Melbourne, on the land of the Wurundjeri people, part of the Kulin Nation. And I'd like to pay my respects to their elders past and present, and to any First Nations people joining us today. We are delighted to be joined by three formidable women and advocates for our panel discussion today. I'd like to officially welcome to the webinar the Federal Independent Member for Bradfield, Nicolette, the Parenthood CEO, Georgie Dent, and of course our sector's own Jo Kowalczyk, CEO of Women in Super. Now, we're here today for a very tight 30-minute webinar on why we need to fix the LISTO. I'm going to kick things off with a quick snapshot of SMC's new research report that we're launching today, including what the problem is, who it affects, and what the solution is. Our panel will then share insights on why fixing LISTO is so important, how to navigate the current policy and political environment, and what we can learn from similar campaigns in the early childhood sector. So without further ado, why are we all here today? What is the LISTO, and why is it breaking the very social contract our super system was built on? So our super system was established with a very simple deal at its heart. In exchange for putting a portion of their wages away for retirement, the government gives us a tax break on super, effectively to say thank you. And this means that all Australians should pay less tax on their super compared to their take-home pay. Now, to make sure that that applies to all Australian workers, regardless of how much they earn, there's a special payment called the Low Income Super Tax Offset, or LISTO, as it's affectionately known within the super sector, which essentially tops up the super of low-income workers to level the playing field, so to speak. But there's a big problem. The LISTO has been frozen for 13 years now, and as a result, more than 1 million low-paid workers are missing out. There are two reasons why this is happening. Firstly, the income threshold has been stuck for 13 years. It means that while wages and tax brackets and everything else has gone up, the LISTO has not. So this means that people who should be getting that tax refund are not getting it. Secondly, the amount of the refund has been frozen too. So that means even if you are eligible, the amount of the refund has effectively shrunk over time relative to the rate of the super guarantee increase. And so what does all this mean? It means that in this year alone, these low-paid workers are missing out on close to $500 million in super contributions as a result of the LISTO being frozen. So obviously this is very unfair, has long-lasting consequences on their retirement balances, and unfortunately it is about to get worse. So when the stage 3 income tax come into effect in 2027, while this is excellent news for lower income workers in terms of their tax brackets, this brings an unfairness from a super perspective into even starker contrast. So it means that unless we fix the LISTO, by 2027 we are going to see 1 in 3 Australians paying more tax on their super than on their take-home pay, breaking the very deal that super is built on. We have an example here of Sally, a cleaner, who earns $42,000 a year, compared to Fred, a manager who earns $220,000. Now, under this perverse outcome, Sally is going to be paying more tax on her take-home pay, while Fred will benefit from an effective 30% tax cut. Does that sound very fair to anyone? So who exactly is impacted by the LISTO freeze? So when we break down who's impacted, we're talking about some of Australia's most low-paid workers, carers and aides, often in sectors such as early childhood and education, health and aged care, hospitality, retail, sales. We're talking about young people who may be working part-time or just starting their career, and of course mums working part-time while caring for their children. These are the people who our super system should be working for, not against. 60% of those impacted are women, and we know that women already retire with significantly less super than men. So not only is this unfair at the principal level, it's actually making the gender super gap worse. If we look at some individual examples and what it means in terms of our retirement balances. Now we've got Jenny on our left here, a female childcare educator. Now, Jenny is our worst case scenario if LISTO isn't fixed and stays frozen. So the analysis by our excellent modelling team here at SMC projects that Jenny will be $60,000 worse off by retirement if LISTO is not fixed. So I'm just going to pause there because this is a really big figure. $60,000 is huge, and it will have a genuine material impact on the quality of life that Jenny is able to have in retirement. So, you know, in the first instance, that could be the difference between Jenny being able to do the little things in life that give her joy, like, you know, going out for dinner every now and then. Nothing fancy, maybe the RSL, you know, buying a little toy for her grandkids a couple of times a year. But it could also impact some of those basic human needs, being able to keep the heating on, being able to pay the bills. You know, this essentially could put Jenny's dignity in retirement out of reach. It will also cost the taxpayer a whopping $41,000 more, as Jenny will need additional age pension payments due to that lost $60,000 at retirement. We've also got Nora, a hospo worker, and like Jenny, Nora is significantly disadvantaged by the LISTO freeze. In her case, it could cost more than $53,000 at retirement and cost the taxpayer an additional $35,000 in extra age pension payments. These are really sobering figures that shine a light on just how urgent it is to fix LISTO. So what is the fix? Well, the good news is there's actually a really simple fix. We're calling on the government to unfreeze LISTO and finally give it the update it needs after 13 years. And this looks like two simple changes. So firstly, lifting the eligibility of LISTO to fully cover the first two tax brackets. So this means lifting it to $45,000 from where it is currently at $37,000. The second is to increase the amount paid up to $810, which effectively means all of the tax on those super guarantee payments are returned. So this reflects the fact that while the super guarantee has increased from 9 to 12%, the LISTO payment hasn't. These simple changes will immediately boost the future retirement balances of 1.2 million Australians. It's an investment in their future. Now, before I have a chat to our panel, I did just want to briefly touch on this investment, particularly in the context of the current discussion around the proposed tax on earnings above $3 million. Now, again, our wonderful modelling team has done some number crunching on this, and we've looked at what it would cost, what the investment would be to fix LISTO. And you can see that it is a relatively small amount compared to what the total revenue that the $3 million tax measure is meant to raise in its first year. This is something for all of us to think about, and I'm keen to discuss it more with our panel. I'm going to start our panel discussion now, and I would say, unfortunately, we do not have time for audience questions due to our just tight timeframes, but we will be sending out a survey after the event, and there'll be an opportunity to submit any follow-up questions or comments you may have. So I will just stop sharing. Wonderful. Ladies, again, thank you so much for joining us. I'm going to start with you, Jo. We've obviously touched briefly on the gender impacts in that presentation, but can you give us a deeper insight into why this is such a critical gender equity issue?
Yeah, thanks, Georgia, and thank you for an incredible presentation. It's no secret we have a stubborn gender super gap in this country, which sees women retiring with 25% less than men. And looking at your figures, we know that that gap starts widening when women are young. So looking at the impact for that cohort of women in terms of LISTO is particularly worrying. We also know that women's retirement savings are driven by very different experiences and opportunities across their career and their life course when we compare that to men. So women work relatively shorter hours across their careers due to higher levels of part-time work and taking time out from the workforce for care. They also earn lower incomes across careers because of occupational undervaluation, clustering in lower level and insecure jobs. Additionally, their capacity to participate in the labour market is impacted by access or lack thereof to affordable and secure housing, affordable and accessible childcare, and the list goes on. So these factors we know impact on the accumulation capacity and on the adequacy of retirement savings for women. So reforming the LISTO is just one of the system levers that can be pulled to address the super gender gap. As you said, Georgia, tax concessions are such a fundamental part of the system. And for over a million low-income workers, The failure to realign that LISTO means that those predominantly women are no longer getting the benefit, and it will just keep getting worse. So you went through there the low paid workers who are affected by this. It's women, low paid, part-time, insecure work. The gender pay gap is such a fundamental driver of the gender super gap. And putting all of this together, that's why it's absolutely critical that we need to fix LISTO for these women.
Thanks so much, Jo. So I wish we had an hour to unpack everything that you just covered there. Georgie, I might go to you now, and keen to get your take both with, obviously, you know, the multiple lens you bring to this discussion of that of working parents, early childhood educators. You know, why do you see this as such an important message and as such an important issue? And what message does it send to these groups if it continues to be ignored by government?
Yeah, thank you so much, Georgia, and for your presentation. I mean, look, Jo touched on this, absolutely, but we know that parents working part-time, and predominantly when we talk about parents who are working part-time, it is mothers far more than fathers at this point in time. And we know that they are already at a significant disadvantage, not just with superannuation, but with their financial security in general, with their take-home pay right now. So we know that on the whole, the sort of income trajectory between men and women starts to diverge really starkly when people have babies. We're still very wedded to this idea that mums are primarily geared towards caregiving and men are predominantly geared towards breadwinning. What we know is that a lot of women, after they become parents, work and earn less. Now, this is not always because that is what they're freely choosing. It is often a reflection of not being able to access or afford decent, quality, inclusive early childhood education and care where they live. It might be because they haven't got an employer who is willing to understand and accommodate their caring responsibilities. So we see that these structural factors push particularly mums into a situation where part-time work is the only option available to them. And then we know that there's also the congregation of women in those lower paid occupations like early childhood education and care. And so we know that parents working part-time are already at a significant disadvantage, and the current LISTO settings make that even worse. So it punishes them again by denying them the tax concessions that wealthier workers are able to take advantage of. And so I think fixing LISTO is about restoring fairness for parents and carers who are already disadvantaged rather than entrenching inequity further.
Yeah, spot on. Thanks so much, Georgie. Nicolette, hearing that and sort of what we've discussed today, obviously a new MP, you know, you're no doubt inundated with issues with groups, you know, like SMC and Women in Super coming, and the Parenthood coming and talking to you and saying, you know, our issue is the most important. Please put it at the top of your pile. We're so grateful to have you on today, and really keen to just understand, you know, why did LISTO stand out for you as something that, you know, you feel strongly about?
Yeah, I want super to work really well the way it was intended, to give people a dignified retirement. And that means you have to be intentional after all these years of having it since, was it 1991 or whenever we got it, 92, 91. We know now how it works and how it does unintentionally create more inequality in certain aspects. And we need to now just, you know, turn up and go, thank you very much. And LISTO has been 13 years as a fixed amount, and we know it's no longer fit for purpose. So, you know, it's why that when you have legislation that pegs tax offsets to dollar amounts rather than using a formula, eventually you are going to get those unintended, possibly, outcomes that don't work in favour of particularly the most vulnerable in this case. And it's why tax brackets, they really do need to be reviewed and adjusted, just as we did in the last term of Parliament with the stage 3 tax cuts. And that's, I think, here why the unfairness comes in. Tax breaks on super contributions are skewed to the high income earners because they contribute more in dollars to super. But it's actually the case that those high income earners are receiving the largest tax break per dollar than they're contributing super. I just want to flesh that out really quickly. And you did do that, Georgia, in the slide, is that stage 3 tax cut means that by July 2027, people earning, can't remember this, $37,000 to $45,000 are going to be paying 14% tax but 15% tax on their super. That's really subverts the whole purpose of the tax concession in super. And it doesn't give people the incentive to put money away for retirement. And in contrast, someone that's earning 190,000, or I think in your case, Jenny, or whoever was earning 220,000, or no, it's the other person, they get a tax concession of 30% on their super contributions because they're paying, 45% marginal tax and 15% on additional super contributions. So it's not fair. And it's why it's important from a fairness point of view that we do fix LISTO and consider its indexation.
Yeah. Thanks so much, Nicolette. And I think it undermines that trust and confidence for lower income people in the system, that it is not working as it's promised, and they can see that it is benefiting those people higher up the income chain. I'm going to stay with you actually, Nicolette, and that was fabulous. Thank you. Keen for your take on the current sort of policy and political environment in which we're having this discussion. What are the challenges and opportunities, and what do you think the political appetite is for reform? I appreciate, again, this could be a whole separate discussion, but
yeah, it's a really I've only had my feet under the desk for four sitting weeks now, and the Albanese government's obviously in an incredible position with a huge win in this particular federal in this 48th Parliament. And it became clear when they'd won 94 seats in the House of Reps that it's like the biggest, Labor win ever, that they didn't want to succumb to any hubris. And I have to say, it seems to me just in the 4 weeks I've been in Canberra, unfortunately, it's pretty fairly hubristic vibe. And it's actually a bit of a my way or the highway feeling in the air, certainly, at least from where I'm sitting on the crossbench. So my sense is that this term, the government's going to stick to its knitting. It's going to do what it's promised in the election campaign. I don't get a sense it's going to do much more than that. And it's going to do it precisely the way it wants to do it. It's a real shame, because I think with a landslide victory, you're positioned to perfectly take on some of that much needed reform. And I'm really excited that we'll get the 3-day guarantee on childcare. I want to make that universal and longer and bigger as well. But in things like this, it's going to be uphill. Doesn't mean we don't have a crack at getting it done with the enormous political capital that's there with the current government. I am reminded, though, by I did meet some of the really impressive new Labor MPs that are really ostensibly women, who I think if they were in this meeting here, they would agree and support this kind of reform. But I was very strictly reminded by some of the organisers in Labor that the new MPs very welcomed, and they're very proud of them, but they rarely get the driver's seat on party policy. So I'm sorry to be have a pessimistic answer to that. I really do think, though, that the government isn't going to do anything too risky. I don't think, unless it's their idea, or obviously it's very good for electoral purposes this term. I hope I'm wrong, but I don't think that they're going to stretch beyond what they've committed to do.
Thanks so much, Nicolette, for those insights. This is, I think, a very good segue into a question for Georgie, who I think has faced similar challenging environments to try and get up complex policy reform. And in particular, we've been talking in the office about the activity test in early childhood when we're talking about the subsidy. Such a complex issue even for me as a working parent, and yet the Parenthood and Georgie managed to turn this into a retail sort of political issue, and got up that campaign to get it done. And so, Georgie, how do you do that? For one, could you give us some advice, and what learnings can we apply here?
Yeah, definitely, and thank you. That is very kind. I do have to acknowledge, and this is part of my answer, there was a huge collective effort in trying to get the activity test ultimately abolished, which we were successful in achieving, but right at the 11th hour of the last term of government. And there's a couple of lessons there. So the activity test is, as you said, it is quite complex, but it was basically designed as a workplace incentive. So the idea was, if you don't have a job, you don't get the childcare subsidy. And so the idea was, well, then everyone will have a job. It completely overlooked the sort of chicken and the egg scenario that if you haven't got a shift, then you can't afford to pay for childcare. But if you haven't got a spot in childcare lined up, you can't take the shift. And so we were able to, I think what we tried to do was make that policy personal and sort of really highlight the practical way in which it punished parents, but also the way in which it punished children from households who stood to benefit the most from actually having access to early education and care. I think that what I learnt, and I think this is probably something in all of the campaigns that we do around paid parental leave, around access to early education and care more broadly, having many voices sharing one message is so powerful. And I don't think you can discount the idea of having as many people as possible talking about this to their stakeholders, their workplaces, their local members. You have to sort of socialize these ideas. And one of my mentors, who I have loved working with, the former Premier of South Australia, Jay Weatherill, he sort of said to me a long time ago, Georgie, when you start to say something so often that you think you might vomit if you say it again, people are probably hearing you for the first time.
Yeah.
Like, you have to just be relentless and repetitive, and you have to keep going. And I say that, so we knew with the last, after the 2022 federal election, when the Albanese government was first elected, we knew we had champions inside the government at a senior level who wanted this dismantled. It still took 3 years of strategic, relentless campaigning to get it done. And it took working with a lot of different organisations and individuals. It also, and I think to Nicolette's point, speaking to anyone and everyone in Parliament is a good strategy. So even though, yes, junior members are not going to have as much say in terms of policy development, but if you've got a handful of backbenchers who are saying the same, they're raising the same issue, it's harder for them to ignore. I think that my advice for sort of advocacy on this point would be to really lean into the unfairness of it, but also the inequity for women. I think we know that this government have stated that they are interested in being a world leader when it comes to gender equity. And so I think being able to frame these sorts of changes in that way is good, and making it as personal as possible. I think that example in the slides from, Sally, who's an early childhood educator, for example, and yet is sort of worse off than a senior executive on $220,000. Telling those stories in a way that highlights that unfairness is really worthwhile.
Yeah, thank you, Georgie. And just maybe building on that, you said it was sort of a relentless 3-year campaign. How do you keep up that pressure, and particularly how do you continue to make sort of the single issue campaigns relevant and interesting? Particularly, I'm thinking about the media, or does the media not as relevant now? There's so much going on in the political news cycle, the 24-hour cycle. Every issue is more important than the last one. How do you keep the issue relevant and on sort of everyone's radar when it's over such a sustained period of time?
Yeah, so look, we have had so at the Parenthood, we campaign for a year of paid parental leave, access to high quality, inclusive early childhood education and care delivered by a professionally paid and supported workforce. And I say all of that because every single word in that ask matters. We don't want poor quality early education. We don't want early education that's not delivered by a professionally paid and supported workforce. Every part of that counts. So we have sort of had this advantage of working towards a big goal, and the activity test was one roadblock in the way of that. And so I think probably the message that I would deliver when it comes to advocacy is to be constantly analysing what is making news, what is in the headlines, who's talking about what issues, and how do you then get your issue into that agenda. And I think we have had some of the advantage of early childhood education and care policy being on the agenda. But I also think, I believe that is in part because of the collective advocacy around that issue that we haven't let up. So even if the government potentially wanted to walk back, or even if the media didn't want to focus on it as much, we've sort of been playing the inside and the outside track to keep as much momentum and as much attention as possible on this issue. And I think being strategic in that way is helpful.
Thank you. Jo, back to you. I suppose listening to that and thinking about the other campaigns, you've run so successfully, Super on Parental Leave. Again, are there any learnings we can take from that? I mean, apart from the fact that it takes a really long time.
Yeah, look, I think that Georgie pretty much covered the field on that. Not giving up, being persistent, consistent, and there really is power in the collective. There is no doubt about it. And having those voices, bringing us together to have this conversation today is demonstrative of that. Really underscoring that need to be able to turn something that is so impenetrable, like the tax system, into something that has a personal impact on individual women is critical. And that's why reports like we're launching today are so important in being able to have that evidentiary basis in order to tell those stories. I agree, talk to everyone. The power, the persuasive conversations that you have sitting in the doctor's surgery are just as powerful as the ones that you have when you're sitting visiting Nicolette in her office, which I hope to do very soon. And I guess, you have to get to a point, which I think we're pretty much at, where you say we've been advocating for this change for such a long time. We have produced all of the evidentiary basis. There's no more time for reports beyond this one that says we are at a tipping point next year where women are going to be paying more. It's time to act.
Yeah.
I guess one final thing is when you do actually win, don't forget to celebrate and keep celebrating it and connecting it to the hard work of everyone who made it happen. I will never stop being tired of saying we won super unpaid parental leave. I doubt I ever will.
Yeah. Thank you so much. Nicolette, I am keen to quickly sort of pick your brain on sort of the broader discussion that we are seeing unfolding around super tax concessions, particularly in the context of the $3 million proposed tax on earnings above $3 million. Do you think that you obviously mentioned the need before to index, when we're thinking about these things, and do you think this sort of potential reconsidering of the proposal, does this open up the door? Should we be trying to more overtly link the two in our advocacy? Really keen for your take on this.
Yeah, I think the answer is both yes and no. I think yes, the opportunity, we're having the discussion about the 3 million. It absolutely opens the door for discussion about LISTO. And we've seen that dollar amounts for offsets or caps or thresholds don't always work. And LISTO is the perfect, direct, comparable example here. And that strong argument, given that the indexations happen for 3 million, why wouldn't it also be possible to bring LISTO into that conversation? I think, though, Georgia, when you talked that about the, you had that slide about how the $3 million tax concession changes would collect around $2 billion, and yet to fix LISTO to the amount that you talked about was going to be a smaller investment of only $570 million a year into lower income super savers accounts. I think that's a really great and strong argument when people talk about balancing the budget, but I don't think that there's merit necessarily legislatively to link the two. And why not? Because I think, what if in the future it makes more sense? It makes sense to increase LISTO beyond basic indexation, like give lower income people more money. So by linking it to that, to the 3 million, it might work against, what needs to happen. And frankly, very rarely in legislation is there genuine hypothecation between savings over here and expenditure over there, unless they're technically levies that are legislated to work like that. So I think, though, that for some people who need to hear that, we've heard very much about the strength of the personal stories in the people that benefit, but also those that need to hear about a balanced budget. I think that's a formidable approach to still prosecute. And LISTO just absolutely should be a public policy priority. So let me know how I can help.
Thank you, Nicolette. On a final note, I'm just going to back to Jo very quickly. Jo, just, what do you say to policymakers who may say the cost of fixing LISTO is too much?
Look, polite Jo would point them to the SMC report about it only costing $470 million investment to go directly into 1.2 million low-income workers' retirement savings. less polite Joe would probably say, why is the question always about how much it would cost to increase women's retirement security? And why isn't the question, why is the government paying tax concessions to people with high incomes and high super balances who don't need them in order to ensure they are secure in their retirement? You know, notwithstanding Nicolette's point about whether we want to link things or not, we've always advocated there's enough money in the system. It needs to be redirected to where it will provide the most benefit. And I think what we've seen today, it's really compelling who's going to benefit the most from the redistribution. And it's not just those 700,000 women currently missing out, but it's beneficial for the whole society.
Absolutely. What a powerful note to finish on. I was committed to finishing within a 30-minute window, and so we are right on 2 p.m. So sadly, that is all we do have time for today. But thank you so much to our panelists for such an incredible discussion. I think, you know, when we're talking about building a collective, having such a diverse array of voices here today is a testament to that. And we hope to continue these conversations. And of course, thank you to everyone who has joined online today and showed your support for this issue. Rest assured, this will remain a huge focus for us and Joe's team at Women in Super, and I know everyone else over the remainder of the year and in the lead up to the federal budget next year. And yeah, we look forward to continuing to update you and work on it with you. And thank you so much. And we will see you all on our next webinar.
Thank you.
Thank
Thanks
you.
so much.